In this video, I will show using university research studies that the UK news is largely not written by journalists, but by PR releases, and then take a deeper look at the BBC sources of news to show that the government has a major role in setting the agenda of news debate. The research papers and supporting material are all in the description box below. The role of PR influence is huge in the UK press. A study carried out by Cardiff University found that 49% of the articles sampled in the UK quality press, for example The Guardian, The Times, Independent, Daily Telegraph and the mid-market Daily Mail, were all from PR companies, where 30% of those were copied verbatim and 19% were largely copied from the PR release. Moreover, direct replication is rarely attributed. Many stories apparently written by a newspaper's reporter originated in other sources and seem to have been largely cut and pasted. Only 5% of articles in newspapers were found which did not make use of any agency copy. In these instances, the story is often solely or principally based around personal perspectives or case studies that have been researched by individual journalists. The study verified that at least 41% of press articles and 52% of broadcast news items contain PR materials which play an agenda-setting role, or where PR material makes up the bulk of the story. This does not mean that the rest of the print stories or broadcast stories in the sample are PR-free, simply that no verifiable evidence of PR activity could be identified. When it comes to government PR, there is a striking difference between print and broadcast news. On TV and radio, use of government PR dominates, with 39% of PR material coming from this source. The proportion of the press is just over half this figure, 21%. This may reflect the style of BBC journalism where most of the broadcast samples came from, which research suggests tends to favour official, often government sources. See my video on ownership to see why that is. I will look in more detail at the BBC later on in this video. In order to measure the overall degree of independent journalism, the study looked at the number of stories that did not replicate either PR agencies or other media. The figures shown are especially striking. 60% of press stories rely wholly or mainly on pre-packaged information. A further 20% are reliant to a varying degree on PR and agency materials. Of the remaining 20%, only 12% are without any discernible pre-packaged content, and in 8% of cases, the presence of PR content was unclear. Reliance on journalists on sources such as PR personnel and government officials is referred to as source journalism. By providing the news feedstock, they cause reporters to react rather than to initiate. Journalists who are fed news stories are less likely to go looking for their own stories, which could bring negative publicity. In this way, source journalism displaces investigative reporting by being the primary source of a journalist's information on a particular story. PR people can influence the way the story is told and who tells it. Journalists who have access to highly placed government and corporate sources have to keep them on side by not reporting anything adverse about them or their organisations. Otherwise, they risk losing them as a source of information. In return for this loyalty, their sources occasionally give them good stories, leaks, and access to special interviews. Unofficial information or leaks give the impression of investigative journalism, but are often strategic manoeuvres on the part of those with position of power. It's a bitter irony of source journalism that the most esteemed journalists are precisely the most servile, for it is by making themselves useful to the powerful that they gain access to the best sources. Now let's look deeper at the BBC and which sources it uses. For this I'm using a separate 2017 study, again by Cardiff University, and I'm using the BBC just because it's the UK's most trusted source of news and because it regularly promotes itself as being impartial. Ensuring impartiality ideally entails provision of a broad view of the range and weight of opinion on a particular topic. It means that journalists play an active role in constructing the narrative surrounding the range of opinion on a particular topic, as they seek to reflect the diversity of the publics they represent, while at the same time attempting to bind the nation and nurture a collective climate of rational opinion formation. Reporters who aim to be impartial should take account of 1. A full range of views and opinions, 2. The relative weight of opinion, and 3. Changes that occur in the range and weight of opinion over time. The most striking finding of the study was the dominance of political sources. They accounted for almost half of all source appearances in 2007, and more than half in 2012. On the topic of Britain's relationship to Europe alone, political sources accounted for 65% of source appearances in 2007 and 79.2% in 2012. The pattern of political source dominance indicates that far from adopting a paradigm of impartiality, the tendency towards an elite and a relatively narrow range of debate only intensified between the 2 years, which the study covered. Nor is it unique to the BBC. In an additional study carried out where researchers examined national programming across the BBC, Channel 4 and ITV, there was a general pattern of dominance of party political sources. By contrast to politicians, members of the public were used as sources a total of 133 times in 2007, or 11.4%, and 85 times in 2012, or 8.5%. These often appeared late in a story. As such, non-elite sources were not primarily setting the agenda for debate, but reacting to unfolding news events. This is consistent with research and media representations of citizens, which demonstrates that although ordinary people appear frequently in the news, this does not mean that they frame public debate or provide new perspectives on political issues. Political sources were much more likely than other source types to be featured in the opening sections of news reports. This had the consequence of framing reports from party political perspectives, which other sources then had to respond to, demonstrating the power of political sources to serve as primary definers. If we look in detail at the most frequently cited political source types, there is a clear pattern. Westminster sources are by far the most prominent voices heard in the BBC coverage, and the incumbent government outranks the opposition, demonstrating the persistence of the Westminster bubble and the advantages enjoyed by incumbents in broadcast coverage. There might be several reasons for this entrenched nature of this paradigm. Manning, in his book, argues that the presence of news deadlines and the importance of obtaining information rich in news encourages a dependency upon official sources. The main problem with all this is that the media depend uncritically on elite information sources and hence push forward elite interests. This is the primary assertion of the propaganda model proposed by Noam Chomsky and Edward S. Herman. The model explains how mass media is used as a propaganda tool by the government and large corporations to manufacture the consent of the public towards certain policies or decisions, whether economic, governmental, or otherwise. Due to the influence that these elite sectors exert, the media itself self-modulates, engages in voluntary censorship, over or underreports certain issues, and exercises purposeful bias to present a distorted picture of the world that is beneficial to the powerful, but offers nothing substantial to the public at large. The news is shaped by the choice of people journalists interview for research, quotes, and on-air appearances. The conventions of objectivity, depersonalization, and balance tend to transform the news into a series of quotes and comments from a remarkably small number of sources. Most journalists tend to use as sources people from the mainstream establishment who they believe have more credibility with their audience. Highly placed governmental and corporate spokespeople are the safest and the easiest sources in terms of giving stories legitimacy. When environmentalists are used as sources, they tend to be the leaders of the mainstream environmental groups that are seen as more moderate. Those without power, prestige, and position have difficulties establishing their credibility as a source of news and tend to be marginalized. Balance means getting opinions from all sides, but not necessarily covering the spectrum of opinion. More radical opinions are generally left out. Government environmental authorities can be used as an environmental source in one story and as an anti-environmental source in another. Nor are opposing opinions always treated equally in terms of space, positioning, and framing. If you like this video, please give a like and a subscribe.